All right, everybody, welcome to our roundtable today. Thank you all so much for joining. Thanks for your patience as we get our show up and running here. I am very excited and honored to be moderating today's roundtable with a stellar group of experts in our field. Um, we'll get right into things by introducing. I myself am Andrew Dafoe. I'm going to be moderating today. I'm a CHI, a certified healthcare interpreter between Spanish and English. I also started a language service company a while back, and would like to introduce our speakers today. A familiar face for these roundtables, actually a couple familiar faces and some veterans here. But maybe the most frequent veteran we've got here, Elizabeth Hartman, language access expert, ASL expert, all around extraordinaire as it relates to language access and language services. Liz, thanks so much, and thanks for all your guidance and entrusting me with taking over some of the moderation here. I appreciate it. I'm a little nervous with big shoes to fill.
Don't be. We're happy to have you, and I'm excited to be here today.
Um, and then we've got Ligia Gutierrez. Ligia, such a pleasure to get to work with you in a virtual space. Ligia and I have had the pleasure of working together in a couple different capacities, both on the advocacy side as well as jointly on the direct services side. Ligia Gutierrez has been an absolute force in New Orleans and Louisiana and really the Gulf South region in terms of language access within healthcare spaces, bringing those services to the largest healthcare provider in Louisiana and ensuring quality of service there, as well as advocating for our profession and our industry. So Ligia, welcome, and it's so nice to get to collaborate.
Thank you. And it's nice to collaborate with you again as well. And thank you for your kind words. I feel so special.
Absolutely. We have Hans Kerremans, if I'm saying that correctly. Hans, I've been trying to
That's
practice.
correct.
The language access matter at manager, in Brooklyn. So Hans, not only a diverse linguistic background, having worked and provided service directly in Spanish, English, but as well as fluency in some other language pairs, and being a staunch advocate for the quality of work that we're doing here in healthcare spaces there on the East Coast. So we've got two of the three coasts connected here, as well as landlocked central U.S., right, Liz?
Well, I'm glad to be here. So,
Awesome. Thank you, Hans. And I know you've been a guest with us before, and we really appreciate your wisdom. I haven't gotten the chance to work as directly with you yet, but I'm excited for collaboration and excited to get sharing some of the wisdom that y'all can provide today. So digging in, we've been able to prepare some really great questions and prompts for today's roundtable session. Our guiding theme today is going to be that if trust is the heartbeat of healthcare, how does language and communication fit into that anatomy? So, trust is, I think, this really important topic when it comes to healthcare. And a lot of what we talk about in general, not just as it relates to language access or limited English proficiency, but in healthcare in general, is these questions of health literacy, right? And I think that ties in really closely to trust and the outcomes that we see. If folks don't trust healthcare as a whole, or they don't trust doctors, or they don't trust individual providers or individual systems or clinics, there's not much chance of getting the good healthcare outcomes that we want to see. So if trust is the heartbeat of healthcare, that trust has to be core and critical. How does language fit into there? So I'd love to hear just to play with some ideas here. If we're going to continue with the anatomy metaphors, how do you see language services? If trust is the heartbeat of healthcare, um, where does language fall in terms of anatomy? Is it maybe the bloodstream or the nervous system? How can we view language services and language and communication in this anatomy metaphor? Um, Ligia, I'd love to hear your opinion.
So for me, language would be the circulatory system. So just like with the body, language is very important for us to be able, first of all, to understand our patients, what is going on with them, what issues they have, but also to be able to have proper and effective communication with them on to how to improve their treatment, how to give them the treatments, just improve their quality of care in general. So if you ask me, into the healthcare anatomy, language would definitely be part of the circulatory system.
I love that. I love that idea of language being the literal vessels in which the necessary pieces get moved from one area to the other. That's great.
Thank you.
Hans, how do you feel about language being part of the anatomy of healthcare?
As part of preparing for this roundtable, one of the questions, one of the situations that I ran into came very clear to me. We were called in by a resident for urgent help with a Spanish speaking patient, a Puerto Rican man. He spoke broken English and had just been diagnosed with cancer. So the medical team and the patient had discussed the treatment plan earlier, but when the nurse came in to begin the treatment, the patient became very agitated, very upset, refused treatment, didn't want anyone to touch him, and demanded to be discharged against medical advice. So the resident brought me in, and together we tried to find out what was going on. So the patient, clearly distressed, said, "The nurse told me she's going to make a hole in my chest and cut a piece of my liver." So after calmly interpreting the medical team actual intentions, that they plan to insert a chemo port in his chest and to take a liver biopsy, you could visibly see the fear begin to drain from his face. The tone shifted completely. He asked more questions, and then he went on to complete his therapy and is now in remission. So this moment wasn't just about translating words. It's about diffusing fear and rebuilding trust. And it's a critical turning point in the care of our patient in general, not just this one, but in general. So like you said, I mean, for me, it's, aside from circular, it's probably the heart of the matter as well.
I love that. I love that. It's critical. And I think you said some really key things, thinking about diffusing fear. And I think fear can be such a blocker and such an impediment to trust, right? And those fears may be very well founded. A lot of times, in the situation described, these are scary diagnoses. These are scary procedures, especially when you look at some of the cultural elements. So having a way to diffuse that fear, because that fear is going to be preventative in terms of trust. It's difficult to trust when you're feeling afraid, when you're feeling scared, right? So absolutely. And it's maybe not an anatomical part, but I think it's interesting to think about that as it relates to fear and rebuilding trust, and maybe this element of courage. So maybe in more of a Wizard of Oz anatomy, I think language can really provide folks with some of that courage as they understand things. Liz, I'd love to see if there's any anatomy parts that stand out to you in terms of how we can relate language and communication.
I mean, it is the utmost importance when you're talking about healthcare to know what's going on, and the best way, the only way, is with language access. The first thing that came to mind when you asked, like, what's the anatomy, perspective, was the nervous system. It just seems like, everything's communicating, and without that, there's that lack of communication, nothing happens. So yeah, that's where I would go.
No, I like that. And I think, so much when we work in language services, Ligia, I know you've experienced this, and Hans, I'm sure on your side too, but we often say, no news is good news, right? Language services are frequently not praised, and really attention to them is only drawn if it doesn't go well.
Right.
If those messages aren't getting across clearly. And so in thinking about it as it relates to healthcare and some of the issues that folks face in terms of healthcare treatment, when you see nervous system, speaking to what you said, Liz, nervous system disorders or interruptions in terms of that flow of communication within the nervous system, that's when it becomes really apparent that good communication is not happening in terms of folks' physical movements, their ability to communicate in other ways as well. So in the same way, when we have a breakdown in communication, it's impossible for the larger body that is healthcare and care for others to function correctly and as it should. I appreciate that. I want to. I know with this group, as we were prepping for this roundtable, we got into a lot of conversations already. So I want to keep moving with some of the questions to make sure we have time to focus on some of the things coming from our attendees as well. The second question we have is thinking about language as comfort and not just clarity. And Hans, I think you shared a really great example of this already, but maybe Ligia and Liz, from your work, you can share a moment where professional language support, it didn't just clarify meaning, but it really truly provided comfort. So it comforted a patient.
So I believe, this happens basically in every encounter that we have. As soon as we walk in the door, patients you can tell that they're so relieved to see somebody, who looks like them, who talks like them, who knows their culture, etc. We here we see it particularly with patients whose babies are in the NICU. We do have, a lot of difficult situations with babies, and our interpreters are very good at going in and not only providing language access to our patients, but they also provide that support that they need, that human touch, the, being comforting, making sure that they understand everything that's being said, making sure that when the providers say, the baby is going to be connected to artificial life support, they understand what artificial life support means, all of that. But like I said, I think it happens in every encounter. Some encounters more than others. We particularly see it with our difficult diagnosis patients, just because it's a shock to anybody. And anytime you get bad news, we always kind of like block ourselves out. We don't really, maybe we understand, but we don't want to face, I guess, what's going on, because it's just something that's so difficult and it's so hard. And I can't imagine being in those mothers' shoes, and having that interpreter there for their support. I know I've heard some stories from our interpreters, and the things that they do for our patients is amazing. And I honestly believe that the interpreter is such an important piece of that particular situation, just to make a difficult situation easier for the patients.
100%. That those are really powerful environments, and really heavy ones too. In thinking again back to this concept of fear and the ability of interpreters and language services to diffuse fear.
Mhm.
I know as a parent, when my baby gets a sniffle, I'm scared. And it almost, I think that fear can be a deeper one and a more visceral one than you even feel about yourself. So, receiving care for yourself or receiving a diagnosis for yourself is one thing, but when it's about your child, when it's about your baby and folks that are so vulnerable and so helpless in those ways, that absolutely having that presence of somebody that understands you.
So I just wanted to add also, it's not only that, but it's also just imagine that you're like in a country where you don't speak the language.
Yeah.
And you're in that kind of situation and everybody around you speaks a language that you don't understand. The interpreter, unfortunately, is not there 24/7. Luckily, we have video and phone interpreters, which I think are just as amazing as in person, but having that in-person interpreter there, it makes a huge difference for them.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it on the head when you said that human touch, right? There are these elements of empathy and human touch, and unfortunately, we see it a lot as folks everywhere, understandably, are trying to work with limited resources and therefore often are trying to minimize costs. And they say,
Yeah.
well, why can't MT and AI and some of the advances in technologies handle the things that human interpreters do? And they still have a long way to go to get anywhere near that level of human touch and empathy that an interpreter can bring to the situation, for sure. Liz, do you have any moments from your work you can share?
I think that the more intense and maybe scary the situation is, the more of a comfort having that language access becomes. And really, as Ligia said, for people who have never been in an emergency situation that where everything's in a different language, if you've never experienced that, it's so hard to really understand what it's like. Because as parents, as you guys have said, that's probably the most scary, is when you're a parent and you have a child that is sick or hurt and you need to get care, right? So you have this child and neither of you understand the language that's being spoken at you, and the interpreter comes in, and it really is that, like, okay, it's going to be okay. I can understand now. I've got someone on my side. Unfortunately, it becomes that kind of a dynamic, yeah, where, okay, it's them versus me, and now I have someone that's with me. They're with me on my side. And I know it shouldn't be that way, because we're all on one team. We all have the same goal. But sometimes, especially when the patient has had some challenges getting access, has had to fight to get what they need, you're definitely going to see more of that. So it's definitely best to start on the right foot rather than have to try to make it up. I know that's not the exact question, but
I think it's an important one, because I think Hans touched on it too, like this element of rebuilding trust, and hopefully we don't have to come into situations where there's a need for rebuilding trust. But I would argue that even in situations where no interpretation, where no language services are needed, there can often be already this need for rebuilding trust. Perhaps due to past experiences or just general lack of understanding or misconception. And what you and Ligia were both talking about, to me, resonated as well in thinking about the third language that we often don't talk about, right? Which is medical language. A lot of these experiences are scary for folks that don't necessarily need interpretation or translation services, because they don't understand the medical terminology, the register, the acronyms, everything else. Often, if there's especially critical care being provided, it can all be very rushed, right? So it's a lot of conversations that people don't understand what's going on, and that can feel very frightening in a lot of ways too. And so, I think we touched on it on the last roundtable last month, but good communication skills translate across these language gaps as well. And so providing that good communication from providers to patients through an interpreter is a good practice, and also providing those explanations in an intelligible, meaningful way, even when no interpretation is needed, is going to help to build patient trust and build positive outcomes there. I did want to point to one comment, and Liz, call you out, because somebody was saying that they were hoping to see a sign language interpreter here on the panel as well. We do. We have our resident ASL expert here, Liz. Unfortunately, we were not able to procure sign language interpretation live for this panel, so I'm not sure if that was the request here, but it's definitely one we want to take into consideration for future panels, so that we can make sure that these roundtables are accessible as well. All right, so our next question here is thinking about misconceptions, and I think this is a really important one, and all of us, given our work and the systems we have worked with and work within, could probably go on longer than we have time for, and are permitted in some regards from a professional decorum standpoint. But what's one common misconception about language access that you wish more people, especially decision makers surrounding language access, what's something you wish that they understood? So thinking about these different aspects of surrounding cost, quality, who's able to interpret. I know Hans, this is a hot topic for you right now, and one we were able to discuss a little bit in preparation. But what's something that if we can use this platform today to help debunk something, what would it be?
Well, I looked it up because I wanted to have something that corroborated with what I was thinking, and it came up with that language access is the misconception is that the language access is just a checkbox or a compliance issue. So it's a matter of having a phone line or a translated brochure, and that's it. That solves the problem, right? But language access is not a service; it's a clinical tool and a human right. And for me, that's the most important part. Pity is that if our CEOs and our leaders really understand that, we would be a lot further down the line.
I think that metaphor is a powerful one of thinking about it as not just a clinical tool, but a critical clinical tool, right? You wouldn't try to run a hospital without an autoclave or sanitizing equipment.
Right.
You wouldn't try to run a healthcare facility without some of these key crucial clinical tools that you're like, absolutely, we have to have these things. And that's the way that this needs to be seen, not as an extra, but as you said, a critical tool and a human right. All right, y'all. Big shoes to follow on that one. Who's going next?
I can go. So I agree with Hans, and I would probably add the fact that most people outside of those of us who work in language think that just because you're bilingual, you can be an interpreter. It's just so frustrating when sometimes we see that they use somebody who's not trained as an interpreter go in and interpret. This is a profession, just like any other profession. We have special training. Andrew, you're CCHI certified. I'm CCHI certified. We have standards of practice, and we have what's the other one? Codes of ethics, like just like everybody else. And for me, it's just so important that our leaders understand that just because the EMA is bilingual does not mean that she is qualified or equipped to be able to interpret. They're two totally different things. I know many people who are bilingual who don't have the capacity to be interpreters, and they know it and they understand it. And it's not to, some people get a little touchy about it. It's not to be, anything. It's just that you want to be an interpreter, perfect. Go through the training, be a professional while you're doing it. And then another one for me that's a pet peeve is the dual what do you call them? Dual role. So if you're the nurse for the clinic and then they use that nurse as an interpreter even though she's trained, you have the issue of the conflict of interest, because as an interpreter we're supposed to be impartial, but if you work for the clinic, you are very likely to want to persuade the patient to do whatever the doctor wants to do.
Yeah, that's one of the issues that I'm going through at the hospital, that because of lack of funding, they want to start using the bilingual staff and trying to push them and trying to push me into a corner. And but it's all because of lack of funding, because we never had that issue before.
Well, I think it's a really difficult question, and there's a couple comments in the chats too that speak to funding and the need to kind of observe budgets in that. But if we start viewing language services as something critical, I think it changes how that funding is looked at, and it becomes a question of how do we go find the funding, because it absolutely has to be provided. You wouldn't see healthcare organizations saying, you know what, we're having a budget shortfall, and so we're actually going to have the housekeeping staff handle a third of the nursing work. It simply wouldn't happen. You wouldn't have people, because you'd say absolutely not, like they're not qualified, they don't have the proper credentials. We can't just move people from housekeeping over to nursing and have them take care of the same responsibilities because it'll be cheaper that way. That would be ludicrous to propose.
Because they watch a
that's
medical
arguably
show every night.
but that's arguably exactly what we're seeing as it relates to interpretation and translation services.
So I want to add something to that. To the point of the funding, there are so many studies already that show that patients who have language access, who need an interpreter, their health outcomes improve. We save money because they stay less. Their length of stay is shorter. They come in less into the clinics and the hospitals. They're admitted less often. Like, there are a lot of ways where the hospital can save using language access, but it's so hard to prove. Even with all the studies that there are out there, it's so difficult to prove, for hospitals. That financially, in the long run, it is in their interest to have a language service department, to have their own interpreters, that, to provide the service for their patients, because yes, it's a human right, but it's also a cost-saving service for the hospital in the long run.
Mhm.
Absolutely, and again, I think, to me right now, one of the trending issues in healthcare is looking at kind of patient satisfaction, right? And this view of healthcare as a business, and how do we increase patient satisfaction? And so, to me, this is core to that. So even for the decision makers, and the folks who are faced with financial constraints and these superhuman tasks of trying to make services fit within a budget, if they think about it from that standpoint of, this is something that's going to be beneficial long term in terms of return on investment, I think that could be helpful as well. And Monica and Ligia, I appreciate you referencing studies. I would argue that we still don't have enough hard data to show,
And they're old.
and they're old.
Yeah.
And so,
Very old.
Hans, Ligia, I know, Ligia, you and I on the advocacy side have tried to work on this. If there are other folks watching the call who are interested in how can we conglomerate data, how could we possibly aggregate data across different health systems to really get a closer eye on what are these positive health outcomes coming out of having interpreter services. We know the negative ones if they're not provided, right? And I understand that healthcare providers don't necessarily want to focus on that, and they definitely don't want to share data on that because it doesn't look good. But maybe we could get together and have a provider neutral way of saying, let's look at all the data on how this can really benefit systems.
Yeah, it's a way also for hospitals. So concordance of care has been proven to improve not only patient experience, but provider experience as well. And that's actually a newer study. I have it somewhere. I just did a paper on that like a year ago. But then if a hospital system is really serious about saving money, they could improve their qualified bilingual program and have it to the point where you can match patients with providers. That way you lower the cost of using interpreters, and you still provide a service for the patient and the provider to have a better experience and to have better health outcomes. That's it. Sorry, I'll stop.
No, please, that's what we're here for.
I'd like to jump in just a little bit.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is really important, especially when we're talking about decision makers in language access, is understanding that language access is not just there for the patient, right? It's there for those providers. And just to get back to what Ligia was saying, that really impacts their satisfaction with their job. If they can't communicate well enough with their patients to understand how to diagnose them, okay, we're not only is that patient going to suffer because they have to deal with the situation longer, right? But those providers are frustrated. They're irritated because they take pride, obviously, in doing their job. They want to do it well. They want to get it done, and they can't because they don't have access. They don't have access, right? It's not just the patient that needs access. And I think that that is something that is so often overlooked and misunderstood because you don't look at it from that patient's perspective. You're looking at it as the doctor to the patient, right? But that patient can't communicate with the doctor can't communicate with the patient, nobody gets anywhere.
Right.
So, that's definitely something that I think is important to remind those decision makers out there.
Absolutely.
And those people using services.
Well, and I hope that maybe through continued education and on our last roundtable, I was really appreciative of having somebody who had an MD on there as well, because I think the more we can educate the providers on this, and like you said, Liz, this paradigm shift of, it's not this patient needs an interpreter, it's I as a provider need an interpreter because I don't speak the language of my patient.
Yep.
It's a subtle shift, but it's a really important one. And when the interpreter is there for me as a provider, so that I can successfully communicate to my patient, because I don't have the skills necessary to do that myself, that being the language skills, their preferred language, that can be really powerful, and that can also help us get advocacy from the provider side of saying, this is a tool that we as providers need to be able to do our jobs.
It changes everything.
It really does, and that's something that we try to train on, both in healthcare systems, educational as well, because you do see that it's, oh, this parent needs a interpreter, this patient needs a translator, oh, we need to call the translator for this case. It's like, no, you need to call it for everybody in the room that doesn't speak all the languages of the room. They're the ones that need it.
Absolutely.
And there was some questions in the chat, and hopefully without derailing us too far into some of the legislative actions and executive actions to come out in the past few weeks, I do think that can be tied to that as we think about language acquisition skills. And it's a cliche, an old joke, but we like to talk about how if you speak 3 languages, you're trilingual, and if you speak 2 languages, you're bilingual, and if you speak 1 language, most likely you're American, because we just have not always valued language acquisition of other languages, but that is really a key missing piece. And I think language acquisition and advocating for language acquisition, both English language acquisition for folks that are here, is a great thing to move forward for. But I think it's something that has to go in parallel with also providing the services when people don't have that language acquisition skills, and haven't had the opportunities to. I want to look at our next question, which is thinking about technology, and this is something we've touched on before as well. So where has technology helped as y'all do this work in terms of expanding access? And I think, Ligia, you may have already touched on this, and I think we looked at this with some of the heavy encounters, Liz, as you said, and the scarier the encounter and the more heavy the content, the more need for human touch. But where is it that human touch still matters most?
So, I mean, human touch matters, I would say, in every encounter, but definitely for the more difficult situations, the bad diagnosis, the end of life conversations, if the patient has some kind of cognitive issue, and maybe the video is of course is a perfectly good asset, but maybe it's not enough for this particular patient because they have something where they maybe don't understand everything that's being said, or they have a lower education level, and the interpreter can, and you should be able to see this, well, if you're in the video, you should be able to hear it if you're over the phone. But when you're in person, it's a lot easier for us to be able to notice these little nuances where we understand, or we can see when the patient or feel when the patient's not understanding and when there's issues. We also have patients who are hard of hearing, but they're not ASL patients because maybe they're older, they lost their hearing. And so even for here, when we know that one of our patients is hard of hearing, we will try to send somebody in person, because we tell our interpreters, make sure you sit in front of the patient, make sure that they're able to see, your lips properly, you enunciate well enough for them to understand, and so on and so forth. There's so many situations where technology would be amazing to advance access, in maybe like the patient registration, things like that, where you don't have to use a resource, an interpreter as a resource for that, and you can leave that interpreter for something that maybe is, that they need it a little bit more than as registering the patient. But then there's certain situations where, in my opinion, we will never be able to stop using in-person interpreters, just because, you need that human touch. You need somebody there to work with the patient and the provider and make sure that the communication is good.
I love that. I love that thought of the prioritization of interpreters, and technology being this tool that will actually allow for better specialization and prioritization of just in the same way that cases get triaged coming into an emergency department, right? How do we triage language access services? That's a great line. Hans, how about from your experience? I know I personally can be somebody who both embraces technology and is incredibly frustrated by its limitations in comparison with its purported capabilities. But I'm curious to see how has it benefited you? How can you see it working in positive ways as we try to expand access?
Yeah, so to give you an idea, right now we got close to 120 VRI devices throughout our hospital. It's a perfect tool, but it's a tool. And sometimes you do need that human touch, right? And like you said, Ligia, right? Ligia said, yeah, when it's either palliative care or mental health or delivering bad news, it's you don't want to do that on with a little screen. But sometimes when you're in a place like ours, we don't have many interpreters. We trained bilingual staff. We gave them the bridging the gap training that was available at that time, and they help. But it's not enough when you have all these patients in different locations, and so the technology helps reach patients in real time better than a human can. How do you get a human from like a human interpreter from the 10th floor down to the emergency room? It's just not possible. But it is important to know that there's a big difference in the look in your eyes, the expression of "I'm here with you, you're not alone," and that's when the healing begins. When you have that kind of connection, So it's very difficult.
It is. It's really difficult, and I think what you describe is really talking about intentionality in terms of how these services get structured. And I love what you said, that the VRI devices are a great tool, and something that I continually say surrounding technology is great until it's not, right?
Right.
And anybody that's been on a Zoom call where the technology didn't work correctly and it's can you hear me now, getting cut off, knows what an impediment to communication technology can be. And so it's great when it works right, but there are definitely times when it doesn't, and there's sometimes when it's just insubstitutable to have in-person services.
You can see it on my screen. I'm the wrong background.
Hans had some IT issues. Just a few.
And thankfully not ones that were critical to being able to communicate and still being able to hear and see them, but it's easy to understand how such a little thing like not being able to get a background to work correctly, or in my case, my hand keeps disappearing into the background, right?
Right.
As an ASL interpreter, I'm going to
backgrounds are a no-go.
significant problems
Yeah.
with communication there.
I just wanted to add
Liz,
one
yeah.
more thing, just before we jump to the next question. So, I've worked with the deaf community a lot, so ASL interpretation, and the deaf community, it's varied with what they'll accept, what they're willing to work with as far as VRI versus in person, right? The best option is always in person, but I will say that VRI and technology has given companies that provide language services, ASL interpreters specifically, the ability to reach deaf patients in very rural areas where the closest interpreter is 4 hours away or 3 states away, right? So they are in a very isolated place as far as having interpretation resources around them. So VRI can come in super handy in those situations, very helpful. And just to add one additional place where that human touch matters the most, labor and delivery. Can you imagine trying to give birth to a child and look at a screen to find out what's being said? Like, no, I'm not going to do that. Get somebody in here to sign in my face because I can't see that right now. Or I'm going to break that tablet. So labor delivery, definitely one of those situations where that human touch is required, I would say.
Absolutely. Those type of encounters are difficult at best, even for an in-person interpreter, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You never know what's going to happen.
And I think to me the resounding takeaway here, and I think this speaks to some of the things that decision makers need to know, and especially right now, some of the legislative or executive decision makers, in terms of understanding that technology has come a long way, and technology can be this really, really useful tool, but it's a tool that has to work alongside of these other practices, such as in-person interpretation, because it can't be a blanket substitution, or it can't be a blanket replacement. It has to work in a complementary way to help allow for the efficient use of resources, rather than a complete switch over altogether to only the technological solutions. Quickly before hopping to the next question, and this is simply a matter of personal pride and ego. Mr. Singh mentioned in the chat my use of the term translator in an inappropriate situation. I would like to clarify, I was quoting a provider in that statement of, hey, I need a translator here. That is 100% one of my pet peeves, as well as is the mislabeling of interpreters versus translators. And one of the key 101 points we touch on in any trainings on how to work with interpreters and translators. I always say, if folks walk away with no other knowledge than the difference between interpretation and translation, I'll be a happy camper. So thank you for pointing it
what's
out.
translation?
Written. So translation is the written conversion, the conversion of any written message from text to text. And interpretation is oral rendition of spoken word from one language to another. So these are really important distinctions, and maybe would go back to one of the misconceptions that I'd like decision makers to understand as well. Not only that being bilingual does not equal interpreter or translator, but folks that are good translators do not always equal folks that are good interpreters, and vice versa. They are very different skill sets. And from my experience in the field, often different personality types as well, in a lot of ways.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, I always say that I am an interpreter. I'm not a translator. I have horrible grammar in both English and Spanish. So, not my thing. But I've heard I'm pretty good as an interpreter. So
Key distinctions for sure. Okay, so technology's moving really fast. We're seeing a lot of changes happening, right? As far as the rollouts of technology, also policy changes, legislative changes, the changing of the scene as far as healthcare goes in general, right? A lot of these things have been different. And when we think back 5 years ago to being right now, right in the middle of peak COVID-19 pandemic lockdown times, things can change rapidly in 5 years, as we've seen. So let's fast forward 5 years. and let's maybe vision for a positive future. What's one change that each of y'all would like to see in terms of how healthcare systems approach language access that we can hope for in the next 5 years?
I want them to shoot for the stars.
Yeah.
Just aim high and just keep going. And please don't just check the boxes. Please don't just follow what you're being told as far as orders and things. Please remember that, these are people and lives matter. And, wrong or miscommunication because of a lack of services can cause death. And, I think that we need to make sure that is always, these are people. These are humans. They deserve language. They deserve to be able to understand what is happening to them. And yeah, shoot for the stars.
Shoot for the stars. Keep it humane. Remember that. Keep a humans first approach.
Andrew, are you taking notes?
Yeah, I always take notes.
Okay. Just curious.
I'm an interpreter. I always have my notepad. So I don't know, what you said is I think really powerful, and it's a crucial call to action. Thinking about what shifts do we need the most? Ligia, what do you see as any of the shifts that we're going to need change wise in terms of the next 5 years as how healthcare systems approach language access?
I would hope, just like Liz said, that that language access is viewed less as like a economic burden and more of, this is something that we provide because it is a civil right, because we need to help these people and improve their health outcomes. I would also hope that the healthcare system would help with finding ways of having more interpreters. So I've noticed that there's a shortage of interpreters no matter the language. And it would be amazing, because it is in their best interest to make sure that we have quality interpreters, and to be able to train interpreters, hopefully improve some income for interpreters, because we all know that not everybody is fairly paid as an interpreter. You have LSPs who have interpreters from outside of the country who may not have the same qualifications as the interpreters here in the United States. They don't require the same thing. So that is, for me, it's a burden on the salaries of these interpreters, because LSPs are like, well, we can get somebody from outside, so why am I going to pay an interpreter here in the United States when I can pay somebody a few dollars or a few cents less? For me, that would be one of the things that I would hope that the healthcare systems change in their approach to language access. And then the other one is making sure that they have a language access department, because there's a lot of healthcare systems who have a department, but it's really not a department. They rely on VRI and OPI and sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was saying it's often a department of one, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah.
But we have the language
Fighting
access
the good fight.
department here. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. The shortage of qualified, I think, interpreters and translators in this field is a big one. That's a big shift I'd love to see as well in terms of the next 5 years. And that's one of those areas that I think the technological advances can really be leveraged in a beneficial and positive way in terms of providing interpreter training and qualifications. Even just thinking back 5 years ago, I know when I started this work, finding resources in terms of training resources as an interpreter was incredibly difficult, and it was incredibly costly too. And if there weren't any resources locally, there were additional costs in terms of having to travel to try and go and get the training that you needed. However, now, and just in the last 5 years, the proliferation of free or low cost or easily accessible materials, training programs, certifications really, really has come a long way. So I think there's no reason that we can't be continuing to improve the pool of interpreters and translators. Hans, maybe you can share with us what's one more specific thing that you're looking for in terms of the next 5 years and how our industry could be shaped for the better.
Well, one of the things for leadership, I would really want or would like to see leadership to reflect the linguistic diversity of our communities, so that because like my wife's Dominican, I spent years in the Dominican Republic. I know how to relate to Dominican people, and I know what the cultural differences are, but my boss has never left the United States. And I'm not sure that he understands the cultural differences between the patients that this hospital has. So it's important for somebody in leadership to actually step forward and says, listen, this is a serious issue. Because it's not just like we said earlier, it's checking a box. It's like, okay, we're in compliance. We got all the interpreter devices and we got all the documents translated. So we're done. We're fine. But that's not it. It's much deeper than that. So, I mean, I do have a good feedback with my leadership. I'm not saying that I don't. But it would be good to have one of them at least to be from a different country, having had different experiences that would actually give him the feel of like, listen, we need to do better, and with the AI coming around and everybody's blinded by AI and AI gonna do this, AI gonna do that, it's scary because the human touch is still needed in interpreting.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I myself have a lot of apprehension about the incredibly rapid embrace of technology that's very new and without a doubt and without question is very powerful in a lot of ways. But the question often is when we get access to new powerful tools that maybe have yet to have long-term results proven. How do we wield those tools? How do we use those, and how can we use them in a positive way? And I think that ties to maybe some of the things that I'm hoping for, and I think there's good momentum already, but looking for transparency. I think transparency and understanding in our field is going to go a really long way, especially as it relates to technology, especially as it relates to, Ligia, you mentioned some of the downward pressure in terms of pricing and compensation that we're seeing by offshoring, which again is another great technological tool. We're now able to get connected with folks all over the world in real time. That can be a huge benefit, but how can we make sure that there's transparency as far as who are you getting connected with on the other side of that screen, and what are their qualifications and what are their credentials? Because I think the transparency surrounding that is going to contribute to a rising tide that will help to bring up both the quality of services delivered, the access that patients and family members are receiving, as well as then the working conditions for folks that have dedicated the time, effort necessary to pursue the appropriate qualifications to really be able to provide a high level of service. So I think that transparency is going to be key. I'll make one shameless plug here for, I think a great group that has come out of some of the AI things as it relates to our field, and that's the Safe AI Task Force. So anybody that's interested in this work, take a look at their work. They've produced some really impressive both studies and recommendations as it relates to how can we use these tools in just the way that we're advocating for here in terms of using them in parallel to these services, right? How can we use them as tools and as safe tools and in a way that's transparent to the communities that are receiving services through them without overstepping there. We didn't have too many questions that came up in the chat today, but I think these conversations are incredibly powerful and practical. So as we think about these human touch and language access and language services being the heartbeat of healthcare, I'd ask each one of you to maybe give us one big takeaway from today's session for you that you hope folks can walk away with, maybe back to decision makers, maybe back to their own work or their individual practice for the interpreters and translators on the call. But what's one thing you hope folks can leave with and that you're leaving with today? Liz, can we start with you?
Yeah. Just because the requirement is here doesn't mean you have to stay there. You can go above and beyond. You can provide access in every way possible and ensure that your patients feel safe and they trust in the providers, and the providers have access as well. So don't just stick with the status quo, because the status quo isn't always the right place.
Mm-hmm.
The bare minimum is just that, right? And we can do
Yes.
better than the bare minimum from a
Absolutely.
compliance standpoint.
Yes.
Absolutely. 100%. Hans, what about you? What's a takeaway that you'd like our listeners and attendees today to be able to walk away with?
I wrote down a few things. So trust is not built
This
by
is why we love
technology.
having you, Hans. You've got you've got a wealth of information.
I'm trying. Trust is not built by technology alone or even by policy. It's built by people. And when the systems fall short, it's often frontline providers, healthcare institutions, and community advocates who step up to fill the gap. So language access is not just a service, it's a bridge to understand, to heal, to safety. When patients feel seen, heard, and understand in their own language, we don't just improve outcomes, we restore dignity. I didn't write this alone, okay? In times when fear, confusion, or lack of access isolate our most vulnerable communities, especially immigrants, it is the human connection that makes a difference. And that connection often begins with the words we choose and the effort we make to ensure they're understood. If trust is the heartbeat of healthcare, then language is its voice. Let's make sure that voice is heard clearly, compassionately, and by everyone. I loved
How
it
do
when
I
I
go
saw
after
it.
that?
So
I
poetic.
did in my defense as moderator. I didn't know Hans had an entire soliloquy prepared. That was absolutely beautiful, Hans. That concept of language and language services is a bridge to safety. In
beautiful.
times that can feel uncertain and fearful, and for a lot of folks in a lot of the communities that we have the opportunity to work with, it can feel very unsafe. And so this is one more way that we get to provide that bridge to safety, which I would hope is one of the goals of all the healthcare providers that we get to work with as well. And so if we can have that common goal, maybe that's a good point of shared goals that we can start from.
Yeah, the thing is that now, at one point, everybody is going into health equity, right? And we need to move language also into that package.
Yes.
It's a big part of it.
Yes.
Regrettably, because of political decisions, the focus to health equity is shifting away again, which is very sad, because the people that are going to be hurt the most is the people, the immigrants, the people that don't speak the language, that don't know how to communicate, the deaf and hard of hearing, the blind people that we hardly ever speak, but we still, as language access providers, also care about. It's a very difficult time that we're living in, and we here in our hospitals, we do our best to communicate with them in the right way.
That human communication is absolutely core, and I think it keeps coming up. The more difficult the situation, the more difficult the encounter, the more necessary, the more critical these services are. And so when sometimes the world itself or larger trends can feel more difficult and more fearful, I think it becomes even more crucial in all the fields that we work in. Ligia.
Well, I agree with both. I will say that the one takeaway that I would love for people to take out of this is the fact that language access is not only a service. We're not just providing a service to provide a service. We are providing a service to help improve people's lives. We are in this business because we truly do care for our patient and for our patients, in our community. Nobody is in this business because they're going to be rich. We all know that, that's never going to happen. So if you're in language services, it's because you really, truly are somebody who cares and who has empathy and who wants to help the community and who wants to, improve health equity, like you guys mentioned. And we just want to make a difference for our patients. And I really wish that the deciders on language access in healthcare would consider that very important piece of the work that we do, because we're not just here for them, but we're here for them and we're here for our patients. We're here to make sure that they are understood, that they feel supported, that they feel, that we care, that they have trust in the system, and so on and so forth.
I love that. Language access not only is a service, but it improves healthcare outcomes. It improves the lives of the people that we get to interact with. It improves the performance of the providers, like we talked about, right? And Hans, as you mentioned, it improves dignity.
Yeah.
So, all right, y'all. We're right here at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for coming. These will be available as a recording. Ligia, Hans, Liz, thank y'all so much for sharing your wisdom and your perspectives today. Really, really powerful takeaways here, thinking about how language access improves the lives, improves the dignity of folks, and that it is this critical bridge to safety in difficult moments, and really allows the heartbeat of healthcare to keep on beating and functioning well. So thanks for the work that y'all do, and thanks for being our circulatory system.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for the great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Andrew, great job.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good job.
Great
I have
moderator.
big shoes to fill. Thank y'all so much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Well, have a good
Bye.
day.
Bye.